Hello and welcome. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad. So glad that you could take some time to be with us today. Today we're reflecting on the subject of the conviction of things unseen, how faith empowers us to overcome and sustains us when victory is not available. This is the second of two reflections on Hebrews, the 11th chapter. For those who have been churchified, Hebrews 11, the 11th chapter is known in many ways as the Faith Hall of Fame, because the writer of Hebrews is focusing in on what it means to live by faith. So last week we focused in on the idea of look and live, how our faith transforms us and transforms the world. We had a key verse about the whole idea that was verse 13, where all these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised, but they only saw them and welcomed them from a distance. And the idea here is that their vision of the world, their vision of life and what it can't be, the vision for them was enough to sustain them and to drive them. We've reflected on a little things. I shared a little bit personally about my family, my grandmother and grandfather. We also reflected on the mountaintop speech, Martin Luther King's Jr.'s last speech before he was assassinated, where he thought about Moses and the Moses' experience of where Moses didn't make it over to the promised land. And for Martin Luther King Jr., he realized that, hey, he's been to the mountaintop and he's seen the other side. And he might not get there with everyone, but he knew that we as a people would get there someday. It was this vision of the world that allowed him to engage in actions, that allowed him to pursue a path that made that world possible. So our vision and our faith transforms us, and it transforms the world. So today we're building on that idea because sometimes we have an overly simplistic side of this passage because we look at all the victories, and we do claim that because we do believe that faith empowers us and equips us to overcome and leads us to victory. But faith does not always lead us to victory in this life. Faith does not exclude us from having hardships. It doesn't exempt us from having bitter setbacks and defeats. Faith does not stop these things from happening to us. It's not a guarantee that we're going to have victory as we would normally think about it. But it is faith that sustains us and carries us through. So again, today we're reflecting on the conviction of things unseen, how faith empowers us to overcome and sustains us when victory is not available. So we'll be looking at key excerpts from the 11th chapter. If you're not familiar with that chapter, it's well worth reading over and over again, and then sometimes looking up some of the people that are mentioned in it and referenced and seeing what their stories are. So the 11th chapter starts off at verse 1. Now faith is the confidence in what we hope for, the assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. Now faith is the confidence in what we hope for and the assurance about what we do not see. Another translation said that it's the conviction of things unseen, that we have the assurance, that we have the conviction that these things that we do not yet see, these things that have not yet manifested in our lives or in the world, we have the conviction and the assurance that one day these things will be so. For example, the great prophetic visions that we're going to take our instruments of war and convert them into the products of agrarian production. And we're going to take the swords and beat them into plowshares, and that the lion is going to lay down with the lamb. That's a big, bold, beautiful vision that the least of these are going to be cared for. It's a big, bold, beautiful vision. And so one of the things that we have is that we who are faithful live with the confidence that this world that was described by the prophets, that this world as described by Jesus, will come to take place. It will come to take place. It's on the way, and we participate in it, and we start living that way. And that's what the ancients were commended for, and that's what we can be committed for. Again, we get to verse 13. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things that were promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance. They saw and welcomed them from a distance. Sometimes living in faith means that we have to have the vision, we hold the vision, we lift the vision up, and we welcome it, and we sustain it from the vision. So even when it's afar off, even when it seems remote, this is the vision by which we orient our lives. This is the vision by which we set our footsteps. This is the vision that drives us forward and sustains us. And as we get to the middle portion of the chapter, we talk about how having that faith, having that vision, having that confidence really does lead to victory. When you get to verse 33, it said, "Who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised. Who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword. Whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Women received their dead, raised again to life." And that's somewhere 35. That last verse is part of verse 35. The author of Hebrews and the author of this passage really does say that being able to have this vision of ourselves and this vision of the world, that being able to have this conviction of things unseen, by having the vision and the conviction, it does lead us to the types of actions that allow us to experience all of these victories. It will allow us to conquer kingdoms. It will allow us to administer justice. It will allow us to gain what was promised. It will allow us to quench the fury of the flames. It will shut the mouths of lions. It will allow us to escape the edge of swords. It will allow us to overcome. And this is what faith does for us. But the author of Hebrews was not Pollyannish. It was not all sunshine and rainbows. Because he also understood that a life of faith at times can be extremely difficult. We're right after the women received their dead and raised back to life. Starting at verse 35, look at part 2. "There were others who were tortured, refusing to be released so they might gain an even better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains, living in caves and holes in the ground." Very often, having a faith and having a vision does give us the ability and the power to overcome. It empowers us, it drives us, it allows us to participate in a new reality. It allows us to participate in the reality that Jesus described, to experience the fullness of God and the fullness of those blessings. That were those who are hungry get fed, those who are thirsty get to drink, where those who are sick are cared for, and even the prisoner finds their freedom, finds their liberation, that even the prisoner we come and see about and that we care about. This vision of the world allows us to love not only God and ourselves and our friends and our family, it allows us to even love our enemies and do good to those who wouldn't do the same to us. It's the conviction that the world can be a very different place. It's the conviction of the world that can be a very different place. The conviction of things unseen that does empower us to overcome. Our faith equips and empowers us to overcome. It inspires us. But we also realize that life is also full of difficulties. Life is also full of tragedies. And sometimes we don't get there. Just as there were some people who were executed They were flogged, they were made fun of, they were mocked, they were ridiculed. They faced all sorts of injustice, social injustice, economic injustice. They lived on the margins and they were marginalized. But it was this faith, this assurance that the way things are, this is not the end. That what we're experiencing, as many have said before, is a comma and it's not a period. That what we see now and the difficulties that we face, they're not the end of the story, because there's a better ending to the story, and it's already been written, and we just have to get there. Faith sustains us when victory's not possible. Faith ensures us, sustains us through hardships. As a pastor, I've seen many triumphs and I've seen many victories. I've seen God do amazing things. I've seen God help to deliver people from being unhoused or homeless. I've seen God help set people free from servitude and from slavery. I've seen God in faith help to mend and transform broken hearts and give people joy. I've seen this kind of vision help to put families back together and just transform lives. I've seen some amazing things, and it was because of faith that people had the confidence in what we hoped for, and they had the conviction of things unseen, and that they were willing to welcome the vision, even though the vision was a long way off. They welcomed that vision from afar, and that vision that they had drove them, that change of perception, that change of understanding about the nature of reality itself, transformed them, and eventually it transformed their circumstances. It's still important to realize that, because being faithful and having a life of faith does not exempt us from any of life's difficulties or problems. I've also seen some really horrible things and horrific things happen to good people. I've seen people get cancer and die. I've seen horrible accidents that killed children and young adults and people who were extremely faithful, that were only serving you. I've seen what the heartache and the pain can do. No, being a faithful person doesn't mean that everything is going to work out for us individually. Martin Luther King was assassinated as he was standing on a hotel balcony in Memphis. His faith did not guarantee him victory, but the faith did guarantee the greater victory of which he was a part of. The conviction about things unseen. Part of what it means to live in faith is that we have the conviction about all these things that God has promised, about all these things, about a world in which the stranger is welcomed and cared for, about a world again where the swords have been transformed into plowshares and the lion lays down with the lamb. The conviction of things unseen. The conviction of things, the whole idea that a world where we could all be judged by the content of our character and not the color of our skin. A world when we can believe, when we can dream. Faith gives us the conviction of these things that are unseen. And faith will drive us to victories over some of the most amazing circumstances. Faith will drive us to victory when victory doesn't seem possible. But when the victory isn't possible, when we're not able to overcome at that moment, when the assassin stands around the corner, faith sustains us and allows us to get through. Faith allows us to pass the vision and the dream and the message on to the next generation. Just as Abraham wandered in the desert, and his son Isaac wandered in the desert, and his son Jacob wandered in the desert. It was that faith that sustained them until they could get to a better place, until Joseph actually ended up becoming the second highest person in the whole kingdom of Egypt, and how Joseph was actually able to provide for the family well-being. Took 4 generations for them to get there. But it was the conviction of things that were unseen that sustained them until the life that they had dreamed of was possible. I don't know what stage of life any of you that are listening are in. Maybe you're in a stage of life where faith is already empowering you to victory, and you're overcoming things that many people thought were impossible. You're living a life that not long ago was simply impossible for you, and it was simply impossible for someone in your position or circumstances to even imagine. Faith does that for us. Go ahead and embrace it and live it. But there's also some of you who may be watching that are in circumstances where you come to realize that your circumstances aren't going to be transformed, and the victory that you'd hoped for isn't going to be achieved. The life that you've hoped for is not available. But faith is what sustains us. Faith is what makes it possible for us to say, I may not get there with you, but I know that we, as a people, will get there one day. Faith is the conviction of things unseen. And when we live by that conviction, faith does empower us to overcome. And again, it sustains us when we can't. Peace be with you.